Hey everybody, this is Mr. Longo, and in this video we are going to cover inverse trig with some weird angles. And this one's a little bit tricky because it involves really you using reference angles and knowing where inverse trig is positive and negative and where regular trig is positive and negative, stuff like that. Okay? So, let's just start by giving you the recommendation that maybe you should draw pictures. So where is negative pi over 10 going to be? Well, negative pi over 10 is down here. And we don't know what sign is of negative pi over 10. That's why we're just going to be thinking in terms of reference angles, because we're just going to, look, we're doing the inverse sign of sine. Those are going to cancel. So your answer is simply going to be something to do with that reference angle, okay? So, this is where sine, over here, down here, is negative. Okay, so this is going to give you a negative sine value. So, inverse sine of a negative is going to give you the negative reference angle. So, the answer to this, so your reference angle here, which might be helpful, is just remember it's pi over 10. So your answer to this question is going to be the negative reference angle because that's what sine inverse trig is down here. So your answer is negative pi over 10. So I know you got the exact same thing. It seems pretty simple, but trust me, it's not. Because the next example is going to also follow that pattern, but once we get to the third example, it will not. So let's start off by drawing a little picture again. Negative 3 pi over 7. Again, that puts us down here in quadrant 4. Our reference angle is 3 pi over 7. Okay, so now you need to remember, down here, this is a negative tangent value. An inverse tangent follows the negative reference angle. So over here, this is going to be negative 3 pi over 7 again. All right, so the first two, pretty simple because when you are working with sine and tangent in the negative quadrant, it's not that bad. So now things are going to get a little bit more challenging. So the first thing we have to do is this is sine of 17 pi over 12. So 17 pi over 12 is down here, and that's going to give us a reference angle of, this would be 24 pi over 12, so you have 5 pi over 12. Okay? So, the problem is sine is negative down here, so your answer to this question is negative 5 pi over 12. Okay, so it didn't just give you 17 pi over 12 because, number one, you have to remember reference angles are always going to be less than 90 degrees or less than pi over 2. So you're down here and you have to remember sine is negative down there. So that's where we're going to get a negative 5 pi over 12. Let's try another one. Negative pi over 7. So cosine of negative 5 or negative pi over 7 is somewhere down there. Now you have to remember cosine is still positive there. So if cosine is positive, that answer is going to be given to you somewhere up here. So cosine is positive at pi over 7. Not down at negative pi over 7. Okay? So you have to just work with this because it's telling you where to go. And again, it might help to remember that when we're working with inverse trig, this is where you have a positive cosine value and this is where you have a negative cosine value. That's why we have to be up there for the positive one. Okay? So yeah, as you can see, these are a little bit challenging. It's really not that difficult because we're only working with reference angles. It's just where are you supposed to be? That's where the tricky part comes in. Okay, so this next one, we're going back to cosine. 7 pi over 5. So we know that 5 pi over 5 is over here. So 7 pi over 5 is down here. That means you have a reference angle of 2 pi over 5. Okay, so now we are looking for, over here, cosine is negative. This is where cosine is negative. Now, cosine is negative, inverse trig, over here in quadrant 2. But remember, over here when we're doing inverse cosine, it is 180, or in this case, pi, minus your reference angle. So your reference angle is 2 pi over 5, but this angle to get there is 3 pi over 5. Remember, inverse cosine is either, in quadrant 1, it's the reference angle. In quadrant 2, it is 180 degrees, or pi minus the reference angle. Okay, so that might be the hardest example of these notes. And finally, the last one, we have the tangent of 15 pi over 13, which again is going to put us in quadrant 3. If this is 13 over 13, then our reference angle is going to be 2 pi over 13. And now we need to discuss, where is tangent positive? So over here, remember, tangent is positive. So tangent is positive in quadrant 1. And our reference angle is just going to be 2 pi over 13. Okay? So again, I understand this one is a little tricky, but you just have to think in terms of where is sine positive and negative, and when you're doing inverse trig, which quadrants are you allowed to be in for when sine, cosine, and tangent are positive versus negative. Okay? All right, everybody, that's it for this video. This is Longo, and I'm out. See you, bye.